A very important question that is asked is how adaptive is Islam? There is obviously a lot of people out there, all Muslims, claim that Islam is adaptable to every context, to every time and place. However, when asked, well, what is changeable about Islam? Whether it is being asked by a Muslim or a non Muslim, sometimes it is hard to find the answer clearly structured. So, what I want to talk about in this video is how or is what is non changeable about Islam, and then but if we can define that, then we can define everything that is changeable about Islam. And when we talk about changeable, I'm not saying things that people would come in and somebody would dream up and then would just change about the faith or its rulings, but no, something that has a different context. So for example, if a ruling had been deduced in context A and now we're in context B, now that ruling might not be applicable in context B, and hence an effort needs to be exerted in ijtihad, or an effort needs to be put in place in order to deduce and arrive at new rulings. So, if we were to say, if we were able to define what's unchangeable about the faith, then we can say everything else is changeable. There are five things that are not changeable about Islam. It doesn't matter if you try hard, if you look in the Quran, if you look in the prophetic tradition, if you ask the scholars, there are five things that are absolutely not changeable about Islam. So the first one is what's called the foundation, the foundational rules. In Arabic, it's called al-ahkam al-rukniya, or al-arkan al-khamsa. And what that means is basically the five pillars of Islam. And these five pillars is the testimony that there is only one God and that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. The second one is the establishment of the daily prayers, the five daily prayers. The third one is the purifying alms or the obligatory charity. And the fourth one is fasting in Ramadan. And the fifth one is the pilgrimage. These five pillars are not changeable in Islam. It's not possible for someone to come and say, all right, I am not going to fast Ramadan. And they would say, I think it is not mandatory. And I still want to claim to be adherent to this faith. That is not possible. As a matter of fact, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, some of the tribes that started to revolt against the leadership of Abu Bakr, and the leadership in Medina, which is the city of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They said, "Look, we're gonna accept everything, but we just don't want to give zakah. We don't want to give that charity and spend it in the path that is supposed to be spent in. It's something that we used to give to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and now he's dead. We're not gonna give it to his successor." And Abu Bakr obviously said, that's not possible. That's changing the faith, especially those five pillars of Islam. And he fought them for it. So that's the first category of things that are not changeable in Islam. The next one is what's called al-ahkam al-qat'iyya. These are the decisive rulings. And what that means is that there is a crystal clear ruling in the Quran, in the holy book of the Muslims, or in the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition about something. If there's a crystal clear ruling, that crystal clear ruling is considered a decisive ruling and it is not changeable. For example, it is not possible for someone to come, whether now in the past or 100 years in the future, and say alcohol is allowed in Islam. Drinking alcohol is allowed in Islam. No, drinking alcohol is a crystal clear ruling in Islam, and what that means is that it is not changeable. So I'm not talking here about rulings that were deduced by the scholars due to different time and context, or time and place. No, I'm talking about these rulings that are very crystal clear put in the faith. These ones are not changeable. And if somebody comes and say, okay, I'm going to change the ruling of drinking alcohol from being impermissible to something that is permissible, and they would say, or they would claim that they're still adherent to the faith, these two are contradictions. So that's the second category. The third category is what's called al-akhlaq al-islamiyya, or the Islamic characters or manners. For example, lying uh, is never going to be good. The idea of inequality is never going to be acceptable in Islam. And let me give you an example. In the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when the Meccan people that were fighting him and fighting this message realized that, okay, maybe we should negotiate a little bit, they came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they told him, look, we'll accept everything. We'll, get rid of the idols. We'll do everything. The only thing that we're not going to accept is that, or we would like to not accept, is that a master always has a higher social status and position than a slave. We don't want to sit with the slaves on the same table. We don't want to pray with the slaves in the same mosque. We don't want to pray, or we don't want to deal with the slaves in the same way that we deal with basically free people. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he told them no. He didn't even negotiate it. He didn't even say, okay, well, we'll try it right now and then we're going to push for that change. He just said no, outright, because inequality is something that goes against the Islamic manners or the Islamic characteristics or the Islamic values, and it is never acceptable and it is never changeable. So basically, what that entails is that if somebody comes and say, okay, no, I want to create a caste system and I still want to be a Muslim, and they want to say people are not equal, that's not acceptable. So that's the third category. It's called al-akhlaq al-islamiyya, or the Islamic characters. The fourth one that is mentioned is what's called al-aqid al-islamiyya, the Islamic belief. And what we are meaning here is the core Islamic belief. For example, God is one. That is not going to change in Islam. Nobody's going to come and say, okay, now there are two gods. That's not acceptable. There are messengers and prophets, and some of their names are mentioned in the Quran. That will never change. This is considered part of the core belief system in Islam. The idea of scriptures. God sent scriptures to humanity. These scriptures, they're called Al-Quran. The Quran is called At-Torah, the Torah. It's called Al-Injil, the Gospel. It's called Al-Zabur. And it's called also Suhuf Ibrahim, the tablets of Abraham. So these are books that, or basically scriptures that God sent to humanity. Nobody can come and claim and say, okay, no, God didn't send the Torah to the Jews. No, that's not acceptable, because it is part of the Islamic core, or the core Islamic belief. Nobody's going to come and say God did not send the Quran to humanity. That's not acceptable, because that's part of the core Islamic belief. So that's the fourth category. The fifth category is what's called maqasid al-sharia al-islamiyya, the aims and the objectives of sharia, of this religion, of this faith. And these are five. So the sharia law, if you will, or the law, the Islamic law, came to preserve five things. The first of them is the preservation of freedom of thought, hifdud-din. The second one is the preservation of life, hifdul nafs. The third one is the preservation of intellect, hifdul aql. And the fourth one is the preservation of progeny, and lineage and family, and that's hifdul nasl. And the fifth one is the preservation and the protection of wealth, and that's hifdul mal. These will not change. These are constants. These are unchangeable part of the Islamic faith, and um, and hence that's the fifth category. Everything else after that is changeable, which means that it can be appropriated to time and place. So let me repeat these again. So there are five categories of things that are not changeable in Islam. The first one are al-ahkam al-rukniya. These are the five pillars of or the five pillars and rituals of Islam. The second one is al-ahkam al-qat'iyya, the decisive rulings. The third one is Al Aqidah al Islamiyya, the Islamic beliefs. And the fourth one is the Al Akhlaq al Islamiyya, the Islamic manners and characteristics. And the fifth one is the Maqasid al Sharia al Islamiyya, or the aims and objectives of Sharia. Everything else is changeable. So, for example, if a custom in one country is to wear a certain set of clothes, then Islam would follow that custom, as long as it doesn't contradict with something that is clearly goes against the Islamic rulings. In some countries, we see people wearing the thobes, for example. That's acceptable in that country. In this country, people would wear suits and shirts and whatnot. Neither of these go against the Islamic tradition. Both of them are acceptable. We can go a little bit deeper into some of the other rulings that might be changeable, but I'll leave that to another video. I hope this is helpful. Go to www.understandislam.ca and subscribe. And let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next episode.